Hello. I don't believe I know you, bitch. It is actually not late, at least here. Yeah, so it's 9 p.m. here. Not midnight yet. Sorry, Roman, but yeah. Hey, Fraudwith. Asked a question in the other day, and I think it got a bit swallowed. If we're using hypostasis and manifestation interchangeably, in what sense is the Father a manifestation of God? Um, so, this is, I think, the problem that um, monarchical Trinitarians have is they don't seem to understand. And this is, I mean, I've been reading Father Stephen's book, and he talks in terms of Jesus as a hypostasis of God, but in that sense, then the Father wouldn't be a hypostasis, right? And ultimately, I think it doesn't work. Like, they're trying to fit the two things together, and um, it just doesn't work. But Father Stephen is not really the expert that Bo Branson is on this. And Bo Branson, yeah. Um, right, but the Nicene Fathers clearly talk of three hypostases in one essence. Now, and this is what Sam's whole point is. He doesn't ousia rather. Yeah, look, ultimately I think if you watched JP Marceau and John Vervaeke speaking, you kind of saw Vervaeke's um Vervaeke was just trying to kindly display his frustration at this attempt to shoehorn um, the Trinity into Neoplatonism, and it just doesn't work. It just simply doesn't work. And you can try, and they do try. I think Bo Branson tries the hardest, but ultimately, you if if you are being logically consistent, you realize that when you say there is one God and many hypostases and hypostases, and I have to say, the fact that the Bible itself talks about the one versus the many, right? This is actually a Hebrew Bible concept, one and many, and um, the one is contrasted with the many in a way that makes uh, this misunderstanding, like part of my frustration with the Trinity and just a lot of Christian concepts in general is once you shift to speaking in Hebrew and reading the Bible, you end up, wow, Jake, I am honored. um, it it would be nice if you would want to jump on. I have actually wanted to speak to you, um, but yeah, that's that's your choice, right? And he's right, and yeah. Okay, so let's go back to the less important people than Jake, the Muslim metaphysician. Um, okay, uh, Ariel says, I don't know how long I'll be on here, but what do you make of Christians who associate chokhmah / wisdom with Jesus rather than the Holy Spirit, Shekhinah, in their paradigm of God equals Father, Ruach, Elohim, Holy Spirit? Look, honestly, I think when you read the Bible in Hebrew, the Bible itself just gives you a framework which is vastly superior and consonant with Neoplatonism, which the Trinity doesn't. And yeah, I have not read the Dionysus Circle, and probably not going to. I have no clue what it is. And Devar or Torah as Jesus, this isn't what I think. I am just asking for your opinion on this internal critique. If someone believes that Jesus is the Word, then that means they should believe he is an embodiment of Torah and not the wisdom of God / Chokhmah. Yeah, it's I look, honestly, it just doesn't work. And no matter how many different ways Dionysus Circle, a community dedicated to study of Dionysus the Areopagite and Neoplatonic philosophical theology bout. Members of the circle: Samuel Bennett, PhD student, University of Georgia. Jack Boksar, MA student, Dominican House of Studies. Marcus Hines, PhD, University of Georgia. Alex Newell, MA, University of Georgia. I see a theme here. Carson Shaw, PhD student, Boston University. Dimitrios A. Vasilakis, assistant professor, University of Ioannina. No idea what that is. Miklos Vashani, University professor, Karoly Gaspar University. And, well, Justin Wilson, PhD, Princeton University, is on the advisory board. I have to say, sounds like another attempt to try to make, I have to say, just if you know Hebrew and you look at the theology that is expected, that is, yes, what Jake said, a representation of God is not a God himself. Finished. And God in his nature is aseh. So if you're just saying one of the three hypostases are aseh, you automatically are saying the other two are not God himself, right? Now, are they in some aspect God? Yes. And the Quran actually apparently criticizes this idea, which is apparent in the Torah, where human beings are referred to as God, including Moses, right? And that reference to Moses as God is only as a representation of God. And anybody who understands chas v'chalila, Moses as being God is obviously misunderstanding. And that's part of the Bible clearly making itself clear that while God represents himself in the world through many different ways, including clouds and bushes and humans and images and dreams and all kinds of things, the term God is being used in an unequivocal manner in that sense. Yes, it is. And that's why it is particular words in Hebrew that are used that way. Why didn't you make this clear to Dr. Stephen DeYoung? Okay, so I have to say my discussion with Father Stephen is not focused on the Trinity at all. And partially because Father Stephen is outsourcing his beliefs to Bo Branson. And the impression I have gotten from his book is that Father Stephen isn't even 100%, and I said this to him privately, that I don't think his book reflects a proper understanding that Bo Branson would be comfortable with. So, honestly, I didn't see a point in it. I think there is a manner in which what he refers to as Unitarian monotheism, and I think a more proper term than Unitarian monotheism might be transcendental Unitarianism, is what I would say is the Islamic misapprehension of the nature of God. And I do believe that there is a Muslim misapprehension of, but I mean, again, as I am sure you are very well aware, well, to some extent I was speaking to him. I mean, that's not, look, I think I was pretty clear that I don't believe that it is, I don't believe, I think I've been pretty clear on my channel that I believe the Trinity is a mistake, but I believe it is a mistake of shituf, which I believe is what Christians, Muslims refer to as shirk. And, well, while this is a debate within Judaism, I have to, following the Rebbe, follow the line that shituf is permitted, not obviously a good thing, but is permitted to Gentiles. I have heard the reason for the double meaning is that El and Allah are derived from, you mean Eloah, are derived from a meaning of mightiness, and that is why it is applied to large towering trees like oak and terebinth. Right. I mean, when you read the Bible in the Hebrew itself, the word El is very obviously, I mean, there's no question the word El is being used of human beings and all kinds of things. Michael Heiser would argue that the word Elohim is not. And I think he's just wrong. Yeah, and right. I mean, look, we believe in hypostases of God. Jake says, the difference is that although you may call other beings God, you don't mean it in the same sense that Young does. So it is merely a verbal agreement. This should be made clear to DeYoung. So, I mean, in future conversations, I think it's pretty clear that I do not believe that a hypostasis of God is God, and I don't believe that it's proper to say that. But as long as Eastern Orthodox Christians are not making icons of the Father, and they will say that the Father is true God and the other the Son and the Spirit are God from true God, right? As far as I am concerned, that is permissible to Gentiles. And honestly, all I care, my hope is to be in a situation where the vast majority of Gentiles on earth can be considered Noahides. And if Christians were to adopt the monarchical trinity as he presents it, they would be involved in what I would argue is shituf, and it is permissible to Gentiles. And once Gentiles are not doing anything which is forbidden to them, then I honestly have to say it would be completely outside of my religion to even attempt to change their minds. Even the attempt to you know, hopefully get Gentiles into a Noahide, like, this is very controversial what I'm doing, right? Within Judaism. And like, honestly, I was talking to my rabbi today, and I was like, Rabbi, like, am I doing something really horrible that I should stop? And he told me, as long as it's clear you don't represent Judaism and you're just a putz, which I am, then he didn't see it as being any more horrible than any of the rest of my horrible things in how I live my life, which obviously isn't as I should live my life. But yeah, just as long as I make it clear that I'm just a putz, and I am just a putz. I am not a rabbi. I am not, yeah. They say the other two persons have the same divine nature as the Father. That is blasphemous. I wouldn't say that's blasphemous at all. I part of that problem is my panentheistic understanding. There is a particularly but divine nature to a representation of God, which is worthy of being referred to by the term God, since the Torah does so. Okay, Aaron says, I think the Trinity could still work because in Luke, Jesus is called my son. So in the text, they're still related somehow. I think that's where the Trinity starts with the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are one. I mean, if that's your understanding, like, yeah. And my problem with that understanding is the canonical three. The Nicene Creed has it true God of true God, or very God of very God, for Christ, though. What can I say? I'm interested in this monarchical Trinitarian concept. Bo Branson has been on Sam's channel several times, and I think he does the best job of describing it in a manner that is hopefully defensible and hopefully permissible to Gentiles. And I have to say, I am not saying that this is permissible to Jews, because I could never say that. And I cannot even say that it is uncontroversial to say that it is permissible to Gentiles. But my rabbis are the Rebbe, as far as I know, unequivocally said that it is permissible to Gentiles to be involved in shituf, and I'm guessing Islam disagrees with that. Okay. What do you make of the wisdom literature that references humans as "listen to me, my sons"? It's wisdom, the Holy Spirit speaking for God, but the point is there's one son. I mean, we are all children of a God. Hey, Aaron, pretty well. Not so great. I caught COVID despite taking every possible precaution, and this is my second infection after the first one disabled me. Yeah, I don't know what to tell you. You still know more about Judaism than I do, Jacob, and you're willing to engage with Christian ideas, which is where I am at. I think you're doing a great job, a great thing here. I hope I am doing a good thing here. Obviously, this is a thing. Ariel, I'm not sure you have a good reference for that. Jake says, again, saying they are called God in the Torah doesn't mean they possess the same divine nature as the Father. The same divine nature? Well, I mean, if you're saying they're not aseh, since they are created as opposed to being a creator, but at the same time, I have to say that however we refer to God, right? Anything we refer to as God is in fact created, since we were able to refer to it by virtue of our reference to any representation of God. It is in fact something which is not aseh, and so its divine nature is lacking. Like, just the fact that I can say aseh, right? When I speak about that which is aseh, right? So I am already referencing something that is a representation of God and not God himself. And yes, I am talking like, and that self-referential negation of my capacity to understand is in fact, I think, the reason why the Tetragrammaton is ineffable. It is self-referentially negating the ability to grasp God. Yeah. If you want to come on, Jake, I would love to speak to you about it. There's a link in the chat. Are the representations of God perfect as the one? Of course not. Of course not. By virtue of being created, they are in fact suboptimal. They are in fact a degradation. I mean, this is the concept of tzimtzum and seder hishtalshalut, and we have Rabbi Chezi here.
Hey, good morning. Good evening.
Morning. Evening. How are you doing?
Thank God. Like I told you, our schedules meet up. Usually I'm going to be heading out soon, so I figured I'd schmooze a little. I was listening to what you were saying right now about you asking the rabbi. Funnily enough, I have a meeting with a rabbi on Friday, and then another rabbi, I hope next week, sort of to discuss this corner of the internet. One of them is named Uri Shirky. He actually met Jordan Peterson when he came over here, and he gave him it's a prayer book that he wrote for Noahites, and like sort of how to, and like a guidebook for how to live the life. And he gave it to Jordan, saying, maybe you should be looking via this prism.
I am aware of him. Unfortunately, he doesn't speak English. If I
So he actually has a new book, which I really recommend that you can get in English as well. I recommend it to everyone. And it's called Nature and Holiness. What did he call it in English? This is how it that's how the book looks.
I
But
tried reading. He was the one who wrote the Shulchan Aruch for Noachides, right?
yeah.
Starting it with the Dine Nafashos, not the best idea.
So part of me wants to talk to part of me wants to talk to him about that. I mean, one of his claims are which again, it's difficult. He was saying, someone was asking sort of what the relationship now is with the Christians, and he was saying that 99% of the sects, basically, as far as he's concerned, like they still fall under Shituf, where they could do their thing, but as far as we're concerned, like he said, like it's going to be very difficult to work together, which I wasn't loving hearing that. He said, post Holocaust, and Sam and I were talking about this, the Christian church did a lot of theological gymnastics, exactly, to sort of to accept more of the Jew, and there's sort of anticipation that we are going to do the same. The Jews will also play a little, and to see, and he was specifically talking about like joint prayers together, and how he thought that it was still problematic. And this other rabbi I'm going to talk to also sort of had the opinion, like you were saying, he didn't use the word putz, but he said that, you have to tread very, very carefully. And part of me wants to say, like, I don't want to tread at all. Like, why don't you guys come in, and then no one has to tread? Like,
No, but that's the problem. Cherky is a posek. I mean,
yes,
he got a haskama from Rabbi Shochatz, and anybody who gets a haskama from Rabbi Shochatz is kosher in my book. And look, I think there's kind of a seder hishtalshalos within Judaism where it does have to be, and it's funny. So you know Chacham Hillel? So Chacham Hillel has an English YouTube channel, and of course it's the most boring thing in the world because he always he only says very, very simple things that nobody should ever be surprised at, right?
mm.
But one thing he said was that because it's Ikvasa the Mashiach, right? And he said specifically of Jews in Galut that we are where the feet of Shir Koma meet with the ground, and in a sense, the feet of Zela Umat the partsufim of Tuma, right? So like at the feet meet, right? And that's been pretty influential in my thinking, right? That we are in fact like the toenails of kedusha meeting with the toenails of partsufim of tuma.
I guess it's always in the context of it being called tuma is just, sort of gives it that, like, the dark side or like wrong sort of connotation.
Noga, and this is actually part of why I translated. So there is a letter from the Rebbe Maharash where he talks about the souls of behemoth, and you can tell that he's actually defending things that the Alter Rebbe said against a misnagid who was making a kal v'chomer type argument, and the Rebbe Maharash was in a very real sense making a kal v'chomer argument that, you know, even animals, right? So it was interesting. It's interesting, and honestly, you should read that entry Umot Olam that I sent you. It's very long, and like it's difficult. So with Antonio, who is a Noahide, I'm actually like sitting there learning this stuff with him. Letter 25, I think it is, in Tanya, that talks about this stuff, right? Because ultimately we have to deal with the things that the Alter Rebbe says in chapter 1 of Tanya, what the Arizal says in Shar Gilgulim. We have to deal with this stuff, right? And frankly, I am dealing with this stuff.
I agree, and I think I was thinking about the the Kuzari standing in front of the king of Kuzar, sort of like, speaking. And so, like, obviously this is not the king's court right now, but in a certain sense, like your channel and just in general, like when I see you on, you are definitely trying to do that. And I'm continuing with sort of what the rabbi was saying, that I don't like what he says, like, as long as you don't represent Judaism, because I mean, presumably, is he saying that he represents Judaism?
Look, if I were to get a shliach on here, he would only be able to say those things which he is sure are representatives as a shliach of the Rebbe, to those things which represent what the Rebbe says. As
No, I
opposed to that's like me. And
yeah, but there's some
a posek, when a posek speaks, right? People can, that is mora hara, right?
Yeah, but I would argue though that if an ultra orthodox rabbi got on this channel right now and started lambasting Christians, I wouldn't be like, oh, like, this represents me and I have to feel like, so, like, I think the community we know that doesn't necessarily represent us, and that's like, so I look at Uri Shirki as like, yes, more mainstream, but like it's very difficult to find, and part of this is part of the meaning crisis, which is you don't really have, oh, this is what Judaism is. Now, politically you do, because you have religious parties in the government over here, but on the ground you have multiple different synagogues, you have multiple different versions. Now, yes, there's a common denominator through many of them agree on many things, but
I was at a Pidyon event today, and one of my friends came up to me and said, I saw your video on Yaron Ruvain. You know who Yaron Ruvain is? Baruch Hashem, he's a putz. Okay. And I have a video calling him a putz. But on YouTube, he's a rabbi that people have heard of. And there's Eliyahu Mizrahi, Rabbi Wein, who never, ever, ever, ever speaks out against anybody, wrote an article speaking out against this guy. Right? Like, imagine what kind of a Apikuris you have to be to get Rabbi Beryl Wein to write an article about you being a putz, right? And look, these people, Yaron's mamish putz. We have on YouTube, we have mamish putzim out there, and honestly, the only real posek who is on YouTube is Rabbi Breitowitz.
Listen, you have to, and I'm just clarifying this to anyone that's listening. A posek is someone that basically could sift through the different halachas, rulings, and make a new ruling, and his ruling carries a lot of weight to it, and depending on the figure, many people might follow his ruling as well. However, first of all,
I'm sorry, whatever Mizrahi's name is. And if you want to know more about the concept of posek, you can Google the word decisor, Decisor, and it is a term for a posek, a rabbinic posek.
I have an issue specifically with, I mean, the psika process has been paused, altered, and basically silenced in the exile. Well, again, there was a process of it obviously continuing, but it's very, very difficult to sort of move. There's many moving parts, or like you could use it as a web. If at this point the web is so convoluted that even if you could come and say, like, you know what, this section is no longer relevant anymore, too much infrastructure is sort of built on top of it, where moving it, whether socially or religiously, could be very detrimental. So
Look,
that's in the.
I gave the perfect example. Rav Avadia Yosef says Ashkenazim can eat kitnias, and it's still controversial.
Yes. So as part of a conversation that I had with my siblings, who some are more secular, some are less, I was mentioning to them there's I don't know if I want to get, well, I was basically mentioning to them that you're not going to find necessarily a posek that's going to come and tell you, from July 3rd, now all Ashkenazi Jews could eat this food. Instead, it's going to be, like I mentioned to my brother, I said, in my house, we already eat that. And when my mom comes, she'll eat certain things that she wouldn't usually eat in her house, but she'll eat in my house. I'm like, that's how it's going to happen. It's not like it's just going to happen that in 10 years from now, we're all eating that. And it sort of has to come ground up, obviously, as long as it's coming from the right place. And this, I go back to the putz conversation, that there's mainstream Judaism, or like what you have to toe the line if you want to be part of, let's say, you don't want to get kicked out of, let's say, your synagogue. However, a lot of the conversation we've been having here would not be permitted in the synagogue.
Who gets kicked out of synagogue? How often? Which synagogue?
Okay. Sorry. You're right. You're right. It's an extreme. You're not going to get kicked out of a synagogue. I'll explain it differently. I would not be invited to teach in the school I taught if I was saying these things right now, for example.
And your kids might get into certain schools. Correct.
And my kids would not get into certain schools. My kids would not get into certain schools if they are aware of this as well. Now, the things I'm saying, quote unquote, I could back them up, right? I could be like, well, Maimonides said this and Maimonides said that. The attitude is that, like, when he's saying a putz, it's not necessarily you're saying something that's incorrect religiously. It's you're going to say something that perhaps hasn't been said in 400 years. And we don't know if, as a religious community, we feel comfortable disclosing these things or having these conversations. This brings me all the way back to the conversation you were having with Father DeYoung, and goes all the way back to you saying, Shema Yisrael. Because, it all really culminates over there. And, like, I think really that's where, as Jews, we can accept a lot as long as it all comes back to the one. And I don't know, how do you recognize those things? I mean, I want to take angels, or let's say characters we see in the Bible, separate from that. But how do you look at concepts of, do you agree with PVK, where when you look at Eloheinu and Adonai, you're looking at God number one and God number two? Are you looking at at that kind of breakdown?
I actually think God one, God two actually does work. Did you see the discussion that Yosef had with PVK about God one and God two?
Like a while back, yeah.
And I actually think that does work, God one and God two, with Havaya and Elohim. But at the same time, what the discussion I was having with Jake, the Muslim metaphysician, he was in the comments, right? Ultimately, the last comment, I didn't put it up. Maybe I should have. The last comment said is extreme negative theology sounds even more apophatic than Ismaili nonsense. Didn't know Jacob's theology was this extreme. I have to say, Ismaili nonsense is very Neoplatonic, and I have found Ismaili Neoplatonism to be about as close as you can get to Jewish mysticism. And yes, there is a. I mean, ultimately, I think when we talk about Yachid Rabim, right? Reshut Yachid with Reshut Rabim, right? We are in fact talking about what I've started calling an apophatic union of the infinite with the infinite with the infinite finite, right? That's why you
One
have
second, one second. Again, the infinite with the infinite finite. Can you just
yes. So
expand on
that
that?
when we talk about something being finite as a representation of God, as a hypostasis of God, right? When you have infinite finite things, that is when the Rabim can actually have a yichud with the actual Yachid. That is Yachid Verabim, right? Once you have an infinite Yachid with a when you have a infinite sorry I got a phone call. You have
Okay.
one infinite being and you have infinite of uh of finite beings. Do you see how that is a yichud there?
But is it? But I'm saying, are the finite beings not being included in the Elohim, and the infinite is just included
Right.
in the Adonai? Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, the Yachid is Shem Havaya, and Elohim is the Rabim, right? But once you have infinite Rabim, when everything is filled with Elokut,
Or
right?
is if everything is identified as with a divine source?
Right. Once you are mevatel, once you nullify the finite nature of all those things which are finite in your mevatel them to the ratzon havaya, right? That's when you get havaya achat.
So I would ask, and like, I mean, you could sometimes do this consciously, but like when, let's say, Matthew Peugeot or Matteo Peugeot is breaking down his patterns, do you see those patterns of indicative of like the divine nature of those things? Like, is he quote unquote spelling out to you again in a certain sense, like these are the equations of how it looks like? You see this pattern repeat again and again and again and again. That's how you could see this divine finite in everything, constantly repeating itself, flowing through.
So I haven't read his book, and I have a very difficult time listening to Pajot, partially because I find it to be so much less interesting than
Really?
yeah. Look,
I know he's such a wealth of knowledge, and I also think just like many times, like like his example, for example, of the chair. I don't
okay.
know if you heard about how, like if you disconnect the leg from the chair, like I just think he has very good insight that allows sometimes for reframing. But you're saying you're less, I guess you're less into that.
I think it's because you come from an FFB background and you were swimming in Yiddishkeit and you see these concepts which I had really before I started swimming in Yiddishkeit, in Hasidus and things like that,
Uh-huh.
right? So, um, for you, he is allowing you to understand Jewish things that you may not have actually paid so much attention to, whereas for me, it seems like it's a pale version of Hasidus.
Oh, so I agree that it's a pale version of Hasidus. However, for example, he was talking to Bernardo, I think. They had this conversation about consciousness, and he's talking about they're talking about demons and angels, but he's basically saying that, like, this could appear even in a conversation between two people. And this reminds me of obviously of like, the Shekhinah, Lo Shara Ela, with 10 people and all the way breaks down to 2 people. So when he says that, that just to me is an affirmation of something that Chazal said. It's just, it's interesting to see how that bubbles up. And maybe this sounds like silly, but to me, that is an example of, Chazal's word making its way into this corner of the internet. I don't have to happen via Chazal's exact interpretation. I'm happy that these truths are making them out. So I would like someone to then take that conversation and be like, okay. And I mentioned this in the last live stream, between 2 people, there's a whole Martin Buber breakdown over there. There's a whole I thou question over there. So again, he drops down like these little nuggets of information, which you could then expand on. So in that way, he's like a chassid in a certain perspective.
Yeah,
but yes, I understand it's different.
No. For you, it is faith reaffirming because, okay, you're involved in this Jewish world, and then you see that these things are coming from a Christian background, are reflecting what you already see, and it's faith reaffirming for you. But that's because you're an FFB.
Okay, but I mean, first of all, sure, I have no problem. Like, I have no problem with that. It just strengthens my resolve in this little corner of the internet, just because I believe, like I said again, the Talmud. I think, and actually, Jonathan Pageau just came out saying he wants to write some fairy tales, but he wants to look at it like midrash. Even using that terminology to me is like, again, that's a joint language that starts happening in this corner, because you could start building and fusing something new. Arguably, you could be like, yeah, the new thing you're building is like, it's the golden calf. It's who knows what you guys are in the building over here.
No, I sometimes wonder if we're building the golden calf, but at the same time, ultimately, like I said, the tikkun of umot haolam comes dafka biyad Israel, and that ultimately we have to the skin has to touch, right? And if that's the heels touching, then it's precisely what Chacham Hillel was saying happens in this generation.
Okay, so I mean, there's many things that point towards this generation, right? You also have the Zohar talking about like in this time you're going to have again like a wealth of knowledge, and so yes, all those things are very inspiring. And then I guess it's sort of, I'm not trying to bug you out though, but like it's sort of ulai le'et hazot hagat lamalchut. This is a sign that Mordechai told Esther. He's like, perhaps for this reason you've gained prominence and got to this position.
Okay,
Ultimately,
do you remember when I quoted that to you?
I'm not sure I remember when you quoted that to me.
I quoted that to you when I said, I might be able to get you an interview to become the rabbi.
Oh, right. With what Rabbi Walpe. Right.
If you wanted, I might be able to get the search committee to talk to you, but that would involve you leaving Eretz Israel.
First of all, in theory, leaving Israel is not like it's not a make it or break it. If one has like a greater impact or mission, yeah. So I'm not like, no, one has to stay here. However, my point is, and back to your conversation with the rabbi, that it's a lot of weight you're carrying and a lot of responsibility to really sort of sift through this. If you want to look at it, you could see as a maybe Yosef and I are a little Aaron and Hur, holding up the hands, making sure.
Dor chutzpah. it says Dor chutzpah. And frankly,
so would you do that here? Would you do that on this channel? Would you do like a reading or of the Dor by Rav Kook, or just a breakdown of like how to look at chutzpah?
Okay, you have to understand. Until 4 years ago, the idea of me picking up something of Rav Kook's was we called him Rav Kook, right? Kook. That's what we called him, Rav Kook. I when I read Ben Hecht's Perfidy, I went full Satmar. I was look. So the Chabad house where I went to school, somebody donated Art Scroll Sidurim that
Yeah.
had Reshit Smichat Gelatenu in them, and I told the rabbi, no, we can't have these in the synagogue, and ultimately I ended up crossing off Reshit Smichat Galutenu in all of the Sidurim to because it's kafira. So you're talking to somebody like I was very, very anti-Zionist, and I have been humbled and toned
Again,
down.
the political movement or the religious movement?
The religious movement is a validation. Maset Satan Hitzliach. You don't understand. I absolutely believe that this secular state, right, was Maset Satan Hitzliach. And that's because I
You
think
think
that
that's the game?
we would have had Hageula Ha'amitit, right? If we had not bargained it for the Tamura, which is this Medina. And it is a Tamura, and it is not Reshit Smichat Gaulatenu, and it's false messianism.
Listen, I'm saying like I would say there's just too much. I mean, there's just too much data.
There's just so much gold. There's just so much gold in this para.
No. I mean, listen. I think people shouldn't lose focus. People shouldn't see this as the end all be all. And I also don't think I don't think we're there. I don't think we necessarily arrived.
Obviously not there. We're obviously not there.
I know, but I guess there's questions politically, which is, this is like the most religious government ever. Maybe you could probably say like in Jewish history, and I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm saying that this religious government though is going to make certain moves and certain policy decisions.
Absolute extremists.
Yes, it's a real big problem.
Yes, it's a real big problem. So why should I be somehow happy that this is the most religious? Like us is being led by Arya Deri again.
I'm giving you an example because you have to look at it. If you're looking at it, if you were 1,000 years ago, and I come and tell you, let me show you a little vision of the future. So in that context, you'd be like, 1 second, there's a land of Israel, there's a religious government, there are emblems of menorah. You'd be like, that's it, happy days. On the ground, I could tell you that we're still very, very far away from that. Clearly, however,
which shows that the Satmar Rebbe was right from the very beginning.
No. I just think it still requires obviously like a lot more work. And hence I don't think even this conversation that we're having like on this corner, I don't think, let me take a step back. The rabbi you spoke to that told you like, you should tread carefully is because also I don't think Jewish people are yet in their position to fully engage this, let's say. Now you are fully engaging this. And let's say if Yosef and I are coming into this, which is like being a little more timid about it or a little more PC about it, that's not at all to say like the way you're doing it is wrong. I'm just saying I don't think the Jewish people have made a version that like, we have a Tuvia Singer which like evangelizes and says like, I'm going to bring you back into the fold. We don't have a version that comes and says like, I'm going to affirm your religion while still knocking down your religion, right? I'm going to tell you that I think this is nonsense. I think that's a lie. I think that's a crime scene. However,
did you listen to my shorts about
Esav?
Yeah,
I heard that. Yeah,
Sina, right? The word Sina really should, like when Christians say love your enemies, like that is the Jewish concept of Sina. It really is. And I think as Jews, we need to recognize that the sinah that in fact we should have for Avodah Zarah, right, is a
Mm-hmm.
sinah that is based in shinui and a hakarat tov and in a and birur and a recognition that called the Rahmana Avid Latav Avid, right? And you know, this game, this mystical game that Hasidus taught, which honestly not enough Jews are playing.
But so this goes back to this kind of conversation. I think that um, I think if Hasidus and this has already been attempted to, but if it was repackaged, I think it could again have a it could have a revolution again, and how it affect, because it had its revolution. Obviously, it had a big issue with the Mitnagdim that were against that. But for example, I use this as a data point. Like there's been like a huge revival of Heschel's work in Israel right now, because they've just done a whole translation of a lot of his work in Hebrew, which hasn't done. And now you have a lot of Israelis sort of being in touch with Hasidus via Heschel, but that's, embracing and loving and hugging. And you see people reading, reading books about the Sabbath and reading books about prayer, which is very different than the Litvak or Misnagid version of all those things. So these things are processes which are clearly happening. And again, that's why I see, when the Baal Shem Tov says,
with me, ufa
Yama Ukedma. But I have a question. The Baal Shem Tov says that in his revelation, he was told that the Messiah will come when all the world. Exactly. But when I see Jonathan Pazot sound like a chassid, that's what I think of. Right. So I enjoy. Right. So I guess I am. My question is to this rabbi, and this is also what I'm going to ask Rabbi Shirky, which is like how best do you think I should engage in this kind of place? Because I don't want to be misrepresenting Judaism. That being said, I don't want to be misrepresenting the misrepresentation of Judaism. Like I don't have to be protecting what this ultra Orthodox version thinks about what he needs to be protecting about Judaism. So then the real question is like, okay, Rabbi, now that
really ultra Orthodox, he's Haredi?
Who, Shirky? No, he's not. He's not. I'm just saying, like, if I go into this arena, you could come and say, like, yeah, don't be teaching the things you're saying right now in a Jewish day school. Sure. But you have no problem me saying this to Gentiles. And the answer could be like, no, then no. This Maimonides section was censored. But you and I know that I'm going to use this now in the conversation because, is there an understanding that that's okay? Or also then would their attitude be like, no, just don't, like you were saying, like, don't be teaching them, don't be involved in, and I don't think that's the requirement. I do think, and I think it's interesting that you're saying, I'm thinking about it more about the nails and that we're basically touching. That's sort of where the hard groundwork has to happen. And in a certain way, it also requires a more pluralistic and more flexible understanding, or more encompassing understanding of God, to have these kind of conversations, because you could clearly see how some 18-year-old yeshiva bacher would basically be comatized if he had to start playing, have the conversation with Father DeYoung, right? He would be like, what do I do now? So that would be overwhelming. And this goes back to, which I don't think, we were talking about your tone and how you go about it, but you are being fierce towards your truth. And I think there's something, I don't think that necessarily needs to be calmed down. I don't think you have to feel like you have to change your tone when you feel like you're defending your truth, with them not realizing how far deep you are in the deep water, basically, as far as Judaism is concerned. Like, you're all the way out there. So for people then to say, like, that you're paddling too loudly, you'll be like, get out of here. Like, I need to make sure I'm not drowning, if that makes sense. Hey, Grim.
All right, parasitic woes, eh?
Parasitic woes. You have to understand, this is this whole corner, sheds a tremendous amount of light on these woes and also creates a lot of tribulation. So, I mean, I would say this is true also in the Christian community, but like, this corner definitely is like, now, like you were telling us to PVK, that like, you're sort of sitting in his brain right now in a certain extent. Like, this little corner now sits in my little brain when I'm sitting down and reading stuff. I'm like, okay, I got to mention this later. This is something that Jess said something here. It's just, I think it's very healthy.
Speaking to your grandfather about this stuff?
It's a good question. It's difficult. My grandfather is a philosopher and a rabbi, but he's 99. So he's still with it, but like, there's only so much I could pull him to a certain direction. I got to also think, like, I have to also assume if I'm going to say something that's going to get him aggravated, like, I'm down to have the conversation, but like, not to give him a heart attack. So like, I really got to see like how far I'm pushing this. I don't want to be like the one grandson that like, why did grandpa die? Because like Chazi kept on mouthing off. So like, I got to be sensitive. But to be honest though, like, definitely with regards to his attitude with, let's say, the differences between Ashkenaz Jews and Sephardic Jews, he thinks like is should be abolished. It's all nonsense.
Does
he's
he
a lot.
Kitnius?
I'm sorry. Does he what?
Does he eat kitnius on Pesach?
He does. So I'll give you an example, a real life example. And Grim, maybe this will be interesting to you. We were at his house, and it was the Sabbath, and we got a knock on the door. And this neighbor walks in, and she says, like, I need help. It's called a Gentile of Sabbath. Now, this term is because you'll
Shabbos Goy. Yeah, Grim knows the term Shabbos Goy. Yeah.
Okay, she knows the term Shabbos Goy. Great. So she's looking for Shabbos Goy, thinking that my grandfather, my grandmother, old people, they might have a live-in that is a Gentile that could assist them, but they don't have one. So my grandfather says, no, I don't. But he asks her, he's like, what's wrong? So she says, I have guests coming for the Sabbath. My power blew and my AC is not working. They're exchanger's guests. Like, the soup's not hot. Like, it's a disaster. So my grandfather's like looking at her. He's like, I'm really sorry. I can't help you. And sort of she leaves. Now I looked at her. I was almost crying. I'm like, Saba. Saba means grandfather. I'm like, grandfather, like, you and I both know that, like, in reality, she could turn on the air conditioner on the Sabbath.
What are you talking about?
Okay, so now Jacob's
stories.
now Jacob. So now my grandfather said, "You're correct, Chazi, that in the system that you and I know, there are loopholes that we could get around to do that. However, I'm a rabbi. You've been doing this for years. She doesn't know that. That's not her system. If I now tell her that, that is going to blow up in her face. Okay, I can't tell her you could turn on the AC, but you can't heat up the soup. It's going to be too confusing." Now, that was very depressing to me. And I looked at him, I'm like, but can't you see that, like, with the age of technology, like, if she checks that up online and then sees that, she's just going to see you as
AC because there's a thermostat. She could turn it on, and then the thermostat, so it's Gorem.
I'm just saying electricity on the Sabbath in general was something that, like, 50 years ago, people said it really wasn't considered fire or necessary.
Very strongly taught that went around to the Chazon Ish and said it's an Isser Deraisa, and it's been one of the greatest blessings in Yiddishkeit that we don't have microphones in our synagogues.
So 1 second. What Jacob is saying is, so my point, Jacob, is that if you go through the sages, you could find versions of how you do so. I would even go so far as, you have to realize that in 20, 30, 40 years from now, when you're living in smart cities, Jews are going to live in Jerusalem. So they're going to have
between a Mekel and a Kal. This is the difference between a Mekel and a Kal. A Mekel is somebody who's lenient, and a Kal is somebody who goes around and finds whatever he wants to let him do whatever he wants.
Hence,
speaking of which, pardon me for being the Chavez Goy or whatever around here, but hey Zach, this whole this Israel thing that Paul loves so much. It's like, are we wrestling with God? Well, we're wrestling with the law to where we can do exactly what we want without disobeying. So, come on, God. Anyway,
I think that's a good point, Grit.
Thank you very much. Yes, there is an Abishter, and it's a question of what does God want, not if I want to turn on the air conditioner or not.
No, but wait. Again, we're going down.
Hold on. I came on for a different reason.
Sure.
First, there's, I don't know if you guys heard this, but like Vervaeke with that Ben Holden guy, he says, I think it's in the one on Ben's channel. He says that I don't say it right. The Kabbalah is basically either Platonic or Neoplatonic Judaism, and then we need to get deeper into it. But the other day you were on and you brought up the narrative space, and I wasn't up for coming on, and so I thought, since I'm up for
you
it
discuss
now,
it now. I'll give a little breakdown to Jacob. Grim was talking to PVK and Sevilla, and he was basically mentioning, I'm sorry if I butcher this, but that this online space sort of creates like this narrative space where it's sort of more real than just, I guess, like a phone call, or you're not texting. It's different than a face-to-face conversation, which in a certain way allows for, in a certain way, like a more productive space because of where it is. However, Grim was also saying that there is dangers to this. I was playing around with this a little, looking at Matthew's Peugeot book, and also thinking about how he talks about the concept of the Sabbath, about the Sabbath being also sort of this sort of meta space, which, it's chaos and order, and you put it together, and you could sort of play around with in that space. That allows you to take ideas and elevate them to like a more divine space where you could play around with. And then I was bringing that back into this narrative space and back to this little corner of the internet, which is, I know there's some people that are nervous that in this digital space, it seems real, but it's not real. However, there could be magic to that, which is, and something Jordan Peterson talks about, like, we have ideas and we send them out to die. But like in this sort of space, in this narrative space, or this meta space, you have these ideas that we could all sort of be throwing up and then sort of playing around with, and then like they come back down in different versions. And then the question then, are they then embodied, right? Are they then embodied? And like Grim said, putting skin in the game, which some other people used already, that term already, which is, what does that embodiment look like? Am I quote unquote now going to church? Am I going to estuary? Am I meeting up with someone?
So Grim, I'm going to speak some Hebrew. We'll get back to you. So I was trying to think, if you were going to have a Beit Knesset for Noachides, you would need a liturgy. So what you can't have is a Beit Knesset, but what you can have is a Beit Midrash, right? And Kedushas Beit Midrash is a greater Kedusha than a Beit Knesset. So we could have a Yeshivat Shem Ve'ever, and it would actually be embodied. It would actually be a place. It could be a real place where people could gather, and you could have a base midrash. And that's why I said we need Meishivim. So go ahead and translate that for Greg.
What Jacob was saying is that, like, you could build a system like that, which doesn't have to be a synagogue, but rather it could be a house of learning. I would argue, well, two things. One, I would say ultimately, even our temple gets its name changed to a house of prayer. So that's just in general, we could all get together in prayer. However, with what you're saying about a Beit Midrash, and this goes back to what I was saying about Jonathan Peugeot using the terminology of Midrash, this little corner and its tentacles, right? So its tentacles are Grimm's channel and Sevilla's channel, and even Jonathan Peugeot channel. These are all this version of that Beit Midrash. You're having an open dialogue where everyone is welcome to come have a conversation. People have been drilling down like this good faith conversation. It's about the good faith. But if that's embodied, which it seems like the good faith is embodied over here, and we don't have to get into this, but it's so embodied over here where you could see a conversation about Jacob and your interaction had to come up over here, because it's important for people to make sure that even that gets the day in the sun, like how we want to be conversing over here. But this is very much, I think, like a Shem V'Aver sort of thing. A Shem V'Aver, by the way, Grim, that has to do with historically speaking, or what we're taught is that Abraham, there was a philosophical center at the time in that region called Shem V'Aver, which the philosophies of the time, the religions of the time were being taught. So the attitude would be that that could be. I don't know if you're saying that you want something like that resurrected. Jacob.
I want to see an actual base medrash. I want to see a real base medrash, like an actual room filled with books that people could go and have a base medrash.
So, for example, Grim walks into this room, right? And in this room, you could do, for example, we're going to do a class right now. It might even be a Zoom class, right? That everyone's like watching and listening to someone. Post that class. There's source material. Go sit down in different groups. Sit and learn, and you're discussing everything we're discussing here. You're just doing that in person, which is sort of what Jacob and I did, let's say I did that for 6 years, post high school, sit, learn, converse, talk, have these kind of conversations.
The buzz of a base medrash behind you while you're arguing with a chavrusa is orgasmic.
Oh, goodness.
Wait, so Grim, tell me what your thoughts about this narrative space a little more.
Okay, well, first,
and if I butchered it, I'm sorry.
No, it's I'm just feeling it out, but it's like the easiest way is like where you're at when you're reading a book, and especially like a Bible for people. It's like I can read a book and I can talk to the author, but when I'm reading the book is a different relationship than me talking to the person. Because when he's talking to me as a person, he's not talking to my internal narrator, I guess. It's like say for example, people now have their social media lives where they'll go through different boyfriends or girlfriends, and the people they talk to on social media all the time remain the same. And it's kind of like a personal narrative space that we're now sharing publicly. And it's like, how is a new relationship going to be as intimate with me as the people who have been with me through my last 5 relationships? And it's just this, the narrative space is sort of like, I think it facilitates empathy. It's like, it's what allows me to imagine me being you. And it's how the stories work in us. And that's how I'm seeing it.
You said something about like, if I'm talking to the author, right? What I was thinking about, if I'm talking to the author, he's talking, I mean, he could be talking with me, but he's sort of talking, he's projecting to my brain, sort of, he's talking to me. And in this narrative space, and arguably what you're saying, even let's say in this kind of conversation, well, definitely when you're reading a book, you're sort of talking to yourself, right? Like it's happening within yourself. There's no one else doing this to you. This is sort of, you're spinning other discs in your head and you're having this internal conversation. And I think in a certain sense that's also done here in a certain way. I guess even the way we speak about over here, or how comfortable people are here, I guess, to take pauses and to like sort of think about what they want to say, which would be awkward, I guess, if you were just having a sort of straight conversation. Here too, I think people are sort of at the same time talking to someone, but but also talking to themselves within like this conversation.
Yeah, it's like
So
it's kind of like I don't know. Jan likes the term private objects, but it's like the same thing as with the Santa Claus. It's like we all have this mental idea of this thing, and this thing in this case is like a self, like the blank template for a self that, like, anybody could be in that situation. I don't. It's like I had a dream. I dreamt that I was Jacob. Right? You can imagine what it would be like if you had that dream, and I can imagine what it would be like. And that's like the narrative is anybody could be I, and that's what makes it a narrative space thing.
I think that's deep though. Like I'm just driving with you for a second. If you could be in a space where you feel like in a narrative space where you're saying I could potentially feel more closer, or I could feel like I could embody the other more, then you're getting close to. I mean, love thy neighbor as yourself. It's very hard to do that and to get yourself into that mindset. However, arguably you could say in this little corner, the more you practice this kind of conversation, it allows you to feel more embodied, or allows you to, like in this narrative, like you're saying, after a year and a half of this, I could really feel like what it's like to be, you said, like Jacob in a dream. But that means that when Jacob, like when I'm having a conversation with Jacob or getting upset or vice versa, I'm really seeing him as myself, which then in a certain way allows you to have a truer conversation. You're sort of dissolving the ego and allowing yourself to be just another vessel over here that could be tapped into. So like when we're all having these conversations over here, we could be tapping into PVK. We could be tapping into Mark, just to really understand his pattern already, understand how he talks. That allows us to do that in an easier way. Maybe. Does that make sense, Jacob? What do you think about this?
You're still muted, Jacob.
Sorry, there was an ambulance going by, so I muted myself. I've been talking to Gavin a lot about theory of mind. And theory of mind is a very bad name for what cognitive scientists, I guess, call the capacity to imagine being someone else or something else, right? Having that ability to project yourself into other people, right? And so is it the narrative that allows us to have a theory of mind, to understand each other, to interrelate, right? I keep on using the example of a computer network, right? So what exactly is it which creates a dialogue, a transference of information between me and you, right? And first of all, it's not only language, that's for sure. And second, what's become abundantly clear is that who I am as a person is not contained within my skin. It is, in fact, somehow distributed among the people who are near me. And that's why if you are isolated, you will lose your mind. You will actually lose your mind if you are isolated, and you will be a different person around different people, right? So is it narrative or poetic, as Mark likes to call it, that allows that connection? Is that the, I don't know, what do you call it, microfiber or whatever it is that is
optic fiber?
What? Yeah.
You mentioned something over here that Grimm also said in his conversation with Sevilla, which was like, he mentioned people bringing up, let's say, some videos because, you know, Paul's busy, and like, let's see what this mind hive could do with it. And that sort of relates to what you were saying, Jacob, which is like, only if you really, we are all sort of, participating and sort of downloading our mind into this. And then this has its own, I mean, Jonathan Pizarro talks about this all the time. Like and you and I were talking about this, Jacob, about like, do you end up making a golden calf, right? Like what we're feeding into this right now, what we don't want, like, you know, this little corner, things like that, it grows, right? But the more people are trying to, let's say, define it, that becomes more dangerous, because like then you're not feeding it. You're just sort of now trying to, from the outside, trying to like build around it, which is less natural. And second of all, it really depends on like sort of who's feeding it. Like Grimm is saying, if we just feed it with random videos nonstop, then, you know, then it's going to turn into mush. If you could, and this is difficult, if you could curate it in a natural way, then I think it becomes more interesting what this hive mind can do with that, basically. But, and again, in a certain sense, like, you know, where are we going to? Because at this stage, it's very much still like hashing out. It's not necessarily someone's like, okay, we have all decided together what that term means, and everyone agreed, and now we're no longer discussing this term anymore. Everything sort of is up for grabs. And that's also a question, like at some point, is this a never-ending discussion about the same topics? And you can be like, yes, because they're eternal topics. And like, you just, the deeper we go, like the more we understand. Or is there, right? I guess if you say like there's a sense of meaning crisis, at some point, does this channel close its doors and says like, we all found meaning, everyone embodied it, and like everyone goes on their way. So, and I guess that's also how to look at this. Is this like, you know, not to look at this as a social club, while there's nothing wrong with participating and enjoying the social aspects of it. If it's seen as a social club, I think then it becomes less, I don't know if that's necessarily what you want to be feeding it, if that makes sense.
Well, there's a whole lot since the last time I said anything. First, with regards to like whether or not these conversations in the narrative space and the theory of mind, I think the narrative space is a layer up or two from the basic theory of mind. Like some people have to get to David Foster Wallace before they realize that like the cash register lady also lives a life and has her own story and her own thing. But I think there's something weird going on with us, is like we have eaten way more stories than anybody else, any humans heretofore. Like the stories were super valuable. They memorized them and gathered around and shared them over fire because they had like 4. Whereas like we eat more stories in a week than people got their whole lives back when. And so there's this narrative space as far as the corner goes, is like there's an archetypal person being created. There's like some like, okay, so there's a normie who gets up in the morning, goes to work, comes home, watches TV, goes to bed, rinse, repeat. And then there's these freaks who go to Comic-Con conventions. They're normies, but instead they do that. And so now there's this archetype of like these people who use the internet to try and make sense of what the hell's going on and where in the story of the story of humanity they are, and where they should be aiming because of where they are in the story. And I think that's part of it. Like a lot of the big pitch of the Christians is like, be a part of the story of Christ, and a part of the big meaning crisis is robots are making us all irrelevant.
Well, I think part of what you're seeing is actually the problem is the normie who comes home and he watches TV. The TV has gone insane.
Has it?
Yes.
What?
If the TV was still making sense, I would still be watching TV. My problem is I turn on the TV, and as opposed to narrative, I'm getting propaganda.
I would say that, I mean, you're getting sure, propaganda, but like season, I don't know, 37 of the Kardashians, or like, what this group is going to handle being like on a boat for like 7 days. These are, like you said, we're saturated with stories, and like look at the Marvel universe, right? Being just like popping out these stories constantly. So I agree with you that you're saturated with stories. Yeah, but that's why. But well, I mean, arguably, like, when they bring up Thor and Zeus, right? Like they're clearly being like, let's just go back to like, our old classic stories, and we'll just like, reinvigorate these. But I was mentioning this, Grim. I was mentioning this to Jacob, that when I hear, let's say, Jonathan Peugeot in his Storyland say something that resonates, or that I see connected to like something that I heard in Storyland, which is part of a story from, let's say, 500 years ago, then that's a data point. Then that's like signal in the noise. So like that, I see in this little corner, it seems, and Jordan Peterson was very big about this, right? He shattered a lot of narratives by saying, like, guys, like Pinocchio, Pocahontas, all these things are just, it's one story. And I think people sort of got lost in stories, and now people are just being, like you just said, they're just being beamed stories constantly to their head. And in this corner here, it looks like people are trying to develop their own story, or be very aware of the story they're in. And if you had to define, let's say, chapters, and I wasn't involved as long, but I've overheard the last few weeks, you had like, there's a Jordan Peterson chapter. There's who this Jonathan Peugeot, Jonathan Vervaeke comes in. There's a lull. Jacob has like his own streaming channel right now. So these are all like little developments, which again, like every time like you shine a light on them, I think you're taking a risk by doing that, because like you're then like really defining sort of this thing. And then it just turns into something that in theory, the TV companies could just sell to you. Go on Bridges of Meaning for like your weekly narrative that we sell you. Which is why I say Jacob is necessary, because unlike the Kardashians, where they have to sit together and have a decision when they're going to infuse the drama inside the episode, right? Here there could be no drama, and everyone's like in jubilation about some awesome podcast that came out that everyone's like, wow, this affirms what I think. To the next day, someone completely like, going off on someone saying that, he's a heretic. So like, I just think it's like a lot more natural over here. But that's because it's also a lot more primal in a certain sense. Like we're coming back to our old stories, and this is in no way a push to like the Christian story, the Jewish story. We're getting closer towards that fireplace. And I guess in a certain sense, like even we don't have a fireplace in front of us right now, and the glow of the computer screen is not necessarily, doesn't warm you up, but there is an illuminating sense to it, that as we even sit over here and converse, it's sort of like a mini little fireplace.
Your face is very large right now. No, it's my favorite Vervaeke quote. I don't want anybody to forget that we're also watching the collapse of the meta narratives. And that's Jacob saying TV sucks kind of can count for that. But it's like, I think it was big because they held everybody together with 3 channels, and then Fox came on, and it messed things up. But the cable was coming on at the same time, and now the internet. There's no national narrative anymore, other than
Well, make America. I'm saying using a concept like "make America great again," right? Which you think would be like, how is that in any way a phrase? That became like the most divisive phrase in the world. You're not going to tell us that we're like. So I agree. I think like this little corner is obviously like a lot more unified than like the United States of America right now, and you see that you can see that all over. Arguably, someone with a religious bent would say, the lack of meaning, hence all this is happening. But I'm going back to skin in the game though, to what you were saying, Grim, because like. Hey, how does that happen? I am not one of those who thinks like, this online is all like just up in the air. Like I think there's a certain embodiment that you could even get via these conversations. However, with regards to really putting skin in the game, how do you see that?
Well, it's like for me, the narrative space is sort of also a place of inactivity. Like where you're building your map of the world and you're deciding where things are how to proceed in the world, and you can get stuck there. And I think a lot of us I think I've been stuck there as part of being in the corner. But for like you if you hold up like whether or not this is a Gnostic hell, or we're trying to build the kingdom here on Earth. Once you start believing either of those, to like embody the belief is to put skin in the game. It's like to actually try with it, like when you're not deciding anymore, and when you start embodying it. To me, that's putting skin in the game. Is the actual embodiment, moving into executive space, or I don't know. But I mean, if you have money, it means investing your money. But for most of us, even this amount of time and attention we put in, is we're putting skin in the game, whether or not we've realized it or not.
I agree. I mean, the amount of time Jess spent on Job, like, I don't know, like there's a lot of time spent on something like that. And I would agree that's skin in the game. You mentioned something about, let's say, you said like $50,000 or like, like Hunter Bay. What do you guys on your end? What do you guys see? Like, is there something that you guys would want to have more on? Like, is there something physical that you feel like would be more beneficial, or if you think there would be like another Thunder Bay in a month from now, it wouldn't be the same?
I want to see Thunder Bay be much, much bigger, be something like Comic-Con, and I want to see it. I want to actually like see us advertising our channels, like paying for advertising for our channels, and like sending it out beyond the people, and like producing content that can on-ramp people into our way of thinking. Because I think ultimately this has to be that crystalline structure I keep on talking about. We're in a super saturated we're in a like the fluid around us is super saturated, and once you create a crystalline structure that other molecules can hang on to, I think it is suddenly going to crystallize completely.
Well, as far as events go, I don't know if you're aware, but my ultimate goal is to get kids out of video games and on into urban combat. I mean, paintball games. And as far as intellectually, what I'm trying to get out of my time in the corner is like you guys still have one, but as far as us, we don't have an initiation into manhood ritual, or so like we're left with the impression that just going to work and paying your taxes is enough, and so there's no civic duty or whatever instilled, and so I'm trying to come up with what we can give 14-year-olds or whatever that gives them a hell of a lot better heads up than I had. And
I think that's amazing. I think that's I really like that you're saying that right now. First of all, I don't know what the demographic is, like as far as how many 14-year-olds are coming onto this, or like, but
no, we're gonna have to take it to them later. But we can
right.
make it here, you know.
So this Chad made this. I think you mentioned this, Grim, like his little trailer for this corner.
Yeah, the last half of the last.
The last half.
It's a beautiful documentary.
So it is really it, and there's something like you could sense Chad's excitement about even making it while you're seeing it, like it's palpable. So I do think, and there was a conversation about shorts. Like cutting shorts from these kind of conversations are very difficult. Like where you're going to have like a little like tiny short on, but potentially that could be done. However, in that little documentaries, like that last half, you felt the community sort of come through, and I'm going back to the narrative space, and I'm going back to Sabbath. Like the Sabbath space is there to be able to take concepts and elevate them. And maybe a track backing of what I said, but like as far as like it not being embodying here, that could also be okay that it's not embodied, as long as we know what we are quote unquote raising, what's rising to the top, and how we're taking that then with us into the real world. So like I do think this is a space that definitely can be used as whether it's a mind meld or a brain palace or however you want to call it. It's a place where you could drop ideas and then sort of play around with them and look for them from different perspectives. I know you're going to nod your head, Jacob, when I mentioned this in the past about Shivim Panim LaTorah, but in this space, as long as, and I mentioned also about looking at a brick in the Tower of Babel, like if we define the bricks by if a brick is a brick and that's it, then there's no point of this channel. But if we could come in and give different terminologies to the brick, where at the end someone's walking out fully understanding what that means, I think that's a lot more powerful. And that doesn't happen by someone just telling you what to think. It happens from sort of like these conversations.
Okay, let me say about 70 Shivim Panim LaTorah, 70 faces to the Torah. There is what we have to stay away from is the postmodern idea that somehow means that anything goes and every voice is equal. Every voice is not equal. There are
Agreed.
people I very much try to amplify their voice, and there are people whose voices I very much try to tamp down. And there are some people like Mark that I try to amplify a little, but like also, okay, you had your say, now stop, and
love
or hate, one of the two. But ultimately, and I have to say, I think that is the feminine aspect, the shadow matriarchy, who has to decide which males get to speak.
Yeah, we don't have much of that. This is YouTube. I mean, we have a few, but
that's part of my plan for Catherine. If she would actually take over that 24/7 channel and be the person who decides who gets which time slot and who doesn't, then she could be our queen.
This relates to you guys saying, which I think that was a pretty good idea. about having sort of like a mini randos for like the bridges of meaning sort of thing, that like, you know, they get on ramped to have conversations. And I think Grimm said like he would have a conversation, like you could speak to Grimm, and then from then on, like, you know, A, you're inside the conversation already, and B, you know, then it could go further up to sort of to Paul. But to what you were saying, Jacob, about the Shivim Panim, like 70 faces, I'm with you that you don't want to be lost in the postmodern trap of, you know, of everything goes. However, I think that space, and speaking as a Jew who's playing around with, let's say, Christian theology, like that's part of it. I need to have access to all of that to be able to then shine a light back onto me, and I already see myself clearly. This goes all the way back to Adam and Eve, and him being cut and being used as an ezer kenegdo, as a help against him. So, like, I'm not saying that there are also narratives that we could completely disagree with, but they need their day in the sun so they could be fully examined, and we could, and this is a term from Kabbalah, which is nitzotzot, sparks. We want to raise the holy sparks out of these things. Definitely, if we're thinking all these things are divine, even if they are misplaced or not used or not used properly, it's up to us to identify the divine nature in them, and for all intents and purposes, have a mini resurrection in those things.
You're preaching to the choir.
And the guy who doesn't really understand you. However, I want to say, I think that if nothing else, the fact that we are publicly showing that you don't have to parade around acting like you're certain, and you're allowed to openly question and converse and hear other people out, is at least some measure of service that we're providing. I'm going to dip out. Good night, everybody, and have a good day, Israel.
Thanks so much.
Okay. I should probably go home, and you should probably go to work.
I'm on the way to work, so I'm moving. But yes, Jacob, thank you so much again for the time and for this channel. And keep on keeping on.
It was nice talking to you. I'll talk to you later.
Catch you later. Bye.
Bye. Yeah, so Cherokee's book, it's not for prime time, Zach. It's not for prime time. It's not ready for prime time, which is unfortunate. Yeah. Okay, good night, people. But yeah, Rabbi Cherokee, God help him. God help him. Pray for that man. Pray for that man. And good night, people.